I've known Joyce Purnick for half a century, from the time she was a little baby. Actually, from the time I joined the New York Post in 1971 as a night rewrite man. What is that? And she had just been, imagine going to a Grateful Dead concert, then having to do night rewrite. I won't talk about substances. But Joyce had just been promoted to reporter. She'd worked for Joe Rabb. And what I remember is that Joyce stood out for her work ethic. She was doing everything, everywhere, all at once. And also for her steely level-headedness. This was the 60s and 70s, don't forget. And level-headedness was not exactly a prized trait among the young. Groovy was better. But that became a hallmark of her journalism. She was fearlessly honest, told it the way she saw it, sometimes to her detriment, when diplomacy and ambiguity might have endeared her to her subjects. Her political reporting particularly stood out from the pack because it was tough, shrewd, and knowledgeable. That was no mean feat after Rupert Murdoch took over the paper from Dorothy Schiff and firmly let the editors know his predilections. When she saw during the 1977 mayoral race how flagrantly the coverage was being twisted toward candidates favored by Rupert, she knew she had to get out. She made her way to the Times, which eventually made her City Hall bureau chief. It's a tribute to another side of Joyce that reporters who worked with her, like Jennifer Preston, say, quote, "She could not have been more generous and kind to me as I was starting out my career." Joyce started a column called Metro Matters, took a break to become the first female Metro editor, but after a couple of years, decided she preferred writing to management and resumed her Metro Matters column, owning it for 10 years. The column won the Mike Berger Award from Columbia University's Journalism School, given for the grace of the writing and the humaneness of the reporting. And columns she wrote about the fatal neglect of abused children by the city's welfare system got her a George Polk Award in 1996. Along the way, she left a trail of shattered glass, given all the ceilings she had broken. The awards are no surprise when you look back at some of her columns and pick out really smart, even lilting passages. Quote, "New York thrives on imagination and reinvention," she wrote in her farewell column. "Ever-changing, it is more an idea than a place, a fantasy that has developed the veneer of reality, because we New Yorkers believe in the fairy tale, the ultimate urban myth." Or a few paragraphs later, maybe our separateness together is what keeps us going. We clash furiously every now and then calm down because we have to. Joyce, it's a pleasure to let you know ceremoniously that you've won the Silurians Lifetime Achievement Award for 2023, joining such legends as Walter Cronkite, Gay Talese, Pete Hamill, Maury Kempton, and your own Max Frankel. And as Arthur pointed out, it's the first husband and wife team to win a Silurian. Now, I would give you the plaque, but it's not here. Party planning is not my forte. So we'll just shake hands for the camera. But before we do, there's other people who want to give a few remarks, and I like to call them up. You know, in a way, I feel like Ralph Edwards on This Is Your Life. You know, or better still, the Sid Caesar version of it with Uncle Goopy. So I'm going to call up Uncle Goopy, Clyde Haberman.
What an honor.
Uncle Goopy.
What an honor. What an honor. I know Joyce even longer than Joe has. We first met in 1970. I think the only person in this room who may have known her longer is Beverly Solichik. And really where I became familiar with Joyce and her work was she wrote a piece about a young actor, and it was just a clear indication of what a graceful writer she was and what she would further become. And it was an actor I'd never heard of who appeared in a movie called The Panic at Needle Park. And that was the first time I became aware of this guy named Al Pacino. It was a wonderful piece. And of course, Joyce, as Joe said, went on to cover politics and more with, again, what distinguished her, her insight, her fairness, but also her toughness and her unwillingness to let politicians in particular get away with what they would love to get away with, whatever. And she frankly had the best bullshit detector I've ever known in journalism. She's been a good and very caring friend to my wife Kathy and me. You know, the truth is we adore her and her recipe for lemon meringue pie, which I strongly hope that we have more of that. But the person I really want to praise is one who may have even better political instincts than Joyce. Back in 2011, I guess Joyce had already left the Times, and she wrote an op-ed piece for the Daily News. And she recalled about how when she was growing up in Queens, there was this teenage kid, about her same age, who was completely reckless in how he drove through the neighborhood, just terrorizing everybody, hot rodding through it. And in his sports car, heedless of everybody in his way. And Joyce's mother, Charlotte, who sadly I never had a chance to meet, Joyce's mother, Charlotte, said to Joyce, "Stay away from that snot-nosed kid." And it's as good a warning as you're ever going to hear about Donald Trump. And we're all still trying to stay away from that snot-nosed kid. And Joyce, I'd like to think Joyce flew Charlotte's banner of flying it high, of being forthright and clear-eyed. And the ones who are truly enhanced by all that, of course, is us, her readers. So thank you for all these years.
I suspect Joyce is either amused or shocked that I'm up here talking about her. But every year when I make her magnificent cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving, and I'm waiting endlessly for the sugar to caramelize, I think of it as penance for all the grief that I caused her as a jerk of a City Hall reporter. Who would occasionally get into arguments with my editor, who was often, I usually hope that it would be Joyce. And I really want to speak on behalf of all the City Hall reporters who are in this room. There are several of us, and I think every one of us learned basically almost everything we know from you personally and from the work that you did. You would. When somebody had a good story at City Hall, you would follow it up with a column, and you would amplify it and explain it and analyze it in a way that sometimes we couldn't do as reporters. And it just was an incredible feeling of pride. But also, with those columns, you showed us how to understand the city, how to understand power in this town in a way that most of us only understood a fraction of what you knew. I remember you once told me that writing a column was like standing under a windmill. As soon as you write one, the next blade is about to hit you again. But the blade never seemed to hit you because every one of those columns was deeply informative. And I remember so many of them, but one in particular, actually there were two. You wrote a lot about municipal arrogance. You hated arrogance probably more than anything else, and you pointed it out whenever it appeared in Albany, any place around the city. And there was one that it seems kind of small, although it's still an issue. It was about police officers who just park wherever they want. It still happens, of course, as we all know, and there's one particular place around the police academy that was notorious for it. And you wrote a column about this, and you quoted one of the restaurant owners saying, nearby, saying, "I have to put a quarter in the meter, why don't those guys do it?" Well, for that one line that restaurant owner said on the record to you, his restaurant was immediately boycotted by the PBA and by every officer who was at the academy. And you went back just a few weeks later and wrote about that restaurant. And you wrote about what they went through and about this blue wall of silence. And it was incredibly impressive to me because eventually the cops started going back there as you shamed them into it. It was like a really small moment, and one that I never forgot, because it showed the power of following up, of caring about the people that you were writing about, of looking into things like the mayor's management report or a labor contract, and which you taught us to do, of course, and finding the real stories there and finding the people behind it. I was internally grateful for what you were able to teach us. I am sorry that I learned it in difficult circumstances, but despite whatever whatever that was like, it was a joy for me, a joy for, I know, many of us here in the room who learned deeply from you, and I just want to extend my deep and lasting thanks.
The last tribute, Joyce, is from Jan Hoffman, who couldn't be here today, but she sent me what she was going to. Can you hear me? Okay. She sent me what she was going to say here. So here's Jan. To generations of journalists and politicians, the name Joyce Purnick immediately evokes a flinty, take no prisoners, relentless reporter who will probably be the smartest person in the room. Her appearance on a news scene, sharp edges, freshly honed, will typically set off a clattering of knee-knocking, both among the competition as well as the subjects of her inquiry. Her burst of a laugh damn well better be with you rather than at you. Certainly when Joyce was Metro editor at the Times and I a reporter on that large, rambunctious desk, all this and so much more were already true about her legendary status. She knew the city and Albany so well that she could readily give reporters deep history and sources for any beat they were pursuing. Good gossip, too. Jersey, not so much. In the heat of breaking news, she issued gruff, brusque orders, staying late herself to make sure all our facts were nailed down. And oh dear, she had no patience for shortcuts. Did you know that when you look up synonyms in the thesaurus for integrity, the first option says Joyce Purnick? Even now, years after we worked together, when I'm in a journalism dilemma, I silently pray, WWJD, what would Joyce do? Yet when I think of Joyce, other images push to the fore. I see her sitting in private rooms at the office, listening deeply, her eyes softening as reporters, okay, yours truly, share moments of professional and personal fear and doubt. I hear the wise, warm responses that spring from the deepest of compassionate wells, and I'm cheered as her famous laugh bursts forth in service of lifting me up. I watch as that fiercest, most dedicated of journalists insists that colleagues and minions alike make personal matters a priority, and note how someone known for having the largest professional Rolodex in New York, you don't know what a Rolodex is? Google it. We'll flip through it even more swiftly to help someone in need, offering names of doctors, therapists, vacation spots, great recipes. So sure, give Joyce a richly deserved Lifetime Achievement Award for her extraordinary journalism, saluting that short armored warrior astride a stallion, wielding an outside lance, rushing to the news. Joyce?
So I have to process all of this and wonder who all of you were talking about. Joe and members of the Board of Governors, thank you so much for this honor, and thank you all for coming. This really means, and I have to confess it surprised me, but it means not this, but getting the award. It means a great deal to me, and I thank you very, very much. Now, people say to start speeches with humor, but stand-up is not exactly my thing. Fortunately, my subconscious came to the rescue. A few weeks ago, this is absolutely true. It's true. A few weeks ago, I dreamt that I was about to address a large, if unidentified, audience. But it turns out I had an opening act, Jon Stewart. He killed. He just killed. Of course he did. Then it was my turn. As I approached the podium, the audience started to leave, led by Jon Stewart. If anyone in this room or listening and watching on Zoom needed proof that making speeches is not one of my lifetime achievements, there you go. However, I see that Jon Stewart is not here today. A very good omen. I hope that you will stick around for the more serious part of my remarks, and please bear with me. Joe said to keep it relatively short, and Max said not to rush. So I'm going to try to do my best. A Lifetime Achievement Award is a humbling occasion to find patterns and maybe even enlightenment in the experience of one's life, notably our shared experience of a life in journalism. The pattern for me has been an amazing string of coincidences and luck, best entitled, Timing is Everything. I know it's not original, but it fits. The obvious conclusion of my backward glance is that almost nothing in my journalistic life could occur these days, less than one lifetime later. The arc of my career reflects profound changes in our profession, not all of them for the good, some of them, but not all. Newspapers have changed, local coverage has changed, the definition of truth has changed in some quarters, and journalist careers have changed. I have little doubt that if I came along today, I would be working in another profession, unfortunately. Journalism wouldn't have me. And maybe, hard as this is for me to believe, I wouldn't have journalism. But I came along in a different era, and going back to at least high school, I wanted to be a reporter. Two people get the credit or blame for that. My aforementioned mother and JFK. I will explain. I was in school during the space race when math and science were absolutely everything. Some of you will remember this. Humiliated by Sputnik, we had to catch up and best the Soviets. Achievement in math and science was a ticket to college and success in one's career. A student bad at both might not make it, and boy, was I bad at both. I was truly innumerate and allergic to science, so my wise mother, worried about my future, encouraged me to study music and art and to write. Writing stuck, and journalism was the right fit. Why journalism? JFK. Ask not what your country can do for you made an impression on me. Reporters do good, I thought. And those Kennedy televised news conferences, that was all I needed, because I saw a few women sprinkled in among the women reporters, and I was hooked. That was it. Now, just imagine if in my high school days, charisma-free Eisenhower had been president, holding those news conferences. I might have decided to overcome my science allergy and master in organic chemistry. This is what I mean by good timing. So I knew what I wanted to do after college, and I sure tried to land a job at a newspaper. I wanted to stay in my hometown, though, which complicated matters. There were many options in those days, in and around the city, options that have, alas, shrunk significantly. Still, I could not find a path into the business. I had to pay the rent. So I got a job at a management consulting company that assessed anti-poverty programs. Remember those, JFK's anti-poverty programs? Boy, was I miserable. I even contemplated the dread of a legal career. Then, I would have been a terrible lawyer, let me tell you. Then one of life's very lucky twists. I happened upon one of those long New Yorker profiles about Dorothy Schiff, the owner and publisher of the New York Post. The piece said that she insisted that all of her mail be answered, if really by her. It was not and is not so unusual for a woman to own a newspaper, but it is mighty unusual for a publisher to insist on answering her reader mail. And for me to believe that a boast in a magazine profile might actually be true. Marry gullibility and desperation, and the rest is my first break. I wrote Mrs. Schiff a letter on a manual typewriter, an old Royal. I really did this. I told her I wanted to be a reporter and I would start anywhere, just to get a foot in the door. About a month later came a letter from Mrs. Schiff's assistant asking me to meet the features editor of the Post, Joe Rabinovich, whom we all called Joe Rab. He, just as amazingly, hired me on the spot, without much interrogation, to be a clerk in his department. Now, that might happen today, but I'm dubious. These days, I would be living online, scouring posts, looking for work at a digital publication, or writing a blog without being knowledgeable enough of my post to be worth a darn thing. The idea of snail mailing a letter today to the equivalent of Dolly Schiff, forget it. Would I have landed a reporting job somewhere? Maybe. Probably I would be a frustrated lawyer today. I should say, a bad lawyer. Of course, there are surely clerks and copypersons in today's newsrooms who make it to reporter, but not in the nurturing, welcoming features section like the old Posts. As some of you will remember, Beverly and Barry in particular, it was fun. I typed up a week's worth of TV listings. I wrote squibs about sitcoms and about old movies like The Beast with a Million Eyes. My description was, he didn't miss a thing. Not poetry, but it kept things interesting. I worked into the early morning hours in the composing room with printers, many of them who could not hear, and they labored over hot type. I learned to read upside down and backwards. I helped fashion writer Eugenia Shepard select the photos that accompanied her stories. I wrote recipes for the Post pull-out Passover section, a job I did for years because, unlike a predecessor, I knew enough not to print Passover recipes that mixed milk and meat. Now, how did I get my next break? I fibbed. Okay, I lied. When I was at Barnard, I earned a half credit working as an intern, a legitimate intern, a few afternoons a week in Senator Robert Kennedy's New York office. Then after college graduation, I joined his brief presidential campaign. About a year into I don't think many people in this room know this story, so this is the truth, and please don't tell anyone. About a year into my job at the Post, a former Kennedy advance man whom I knew, Jerry Bruno, was promoting the book he wrote with Jeff Greenfield called, appropriately enough, The Advance Man. I told Joe Rabinovich that I thought Jerry would make a good subject for the paper's daily close-up, a feature of about 450 words. But I added, Joe would have to wait a bit to assign a reporter to the close-up because Jerry was traveling and hard to reach. This was, plausible in those days. There weren't cell phones, there was no texting and so on. Now, Jerry Bruno was not hard to reach. I knew how to reach him. I called him, I interviewed him, and pulling an all-nighter, I wrote a daily close-up. I doubt I fooled Joe for a New York Minute, but I got my first byline, and less than 2 years after starting at the Post, I was a full-fledged reporter. The Post was unusual in that it did not share the industry's disdain in those days for women in the newsroom. Dorothy Schiff was hardly a traditional feminist, I might add, but still, she was the owner and she was the publisher, presumably because of her position. The Post newsroom and features department were friendly to women, and they were my role models. Judith Michelson, Roberta Brandis Gratz, who's here, Hope McLeod, Lindsay Van Gelder, Fern Maria Ekman, Helen Dudar, Beverly Solachek, Bryna Taubman, Barbara Yunker, Nora Ephron flitted through the post. She didn't like it, and it did not like her, but she was there. Sylvia Porter and Harriet Van Horn were columnists. Soon Anna Quinlan, Joy Cook, Marcia Cranes, Joyce Wadler, Jane Perlez joined the post. I don't recall any female editors in those days, and I suspect our salaries were not equal to the men's. But those were not matters I worried about then. I was a reporter. And women at the Post were not limited to the women's pages, quote unquote, as they used to be called. We covered everything. That included my abiding interest, local government and politics. Writing about my city and state was what I had long wanted to do, an interest that developed during those internship days with Kennedy's office. I saw government failings up close, and I thought writing about them might help. I also saw the arrogance of politics up close, and I wanted to expose that too. Okay, I was naive about journalism's power, but I did over the years do some of what I had hoped. I covered local congressional, Senate, and mayoral campaigns at the Post and assumed I would be at that newspaper throughout my career, until Rupert Murdoch. He bought the Post in 1976, and he took over in 1977. One very sad thing that has not changed over the decades is Murdoch. He pursued profits and power then, just as he does now, never truth and justice. I stayed a year, hoping against hope he would not be as bad as his reputation suggested he would be. He was. He wanted to make his mark by being a kingmaker, or more accurately, a mayor-maker. During what we would later see at Fox, he turned the Post into the equivalent of a publicity sheet for Ed Koch, one of 6 candidates running for the Democratic mayoral nomination in 1977, and Rupert's overt choice. That put me and other Post reporters in a very, very difficult position. My copy was not mangled, but it was surrounded by promotional articles and distorted polls that might as well have been Koch ads. Not long after the campaign ended, as a matter of principle and to preserve my reputation, I quit and I joined the unemployed. I had been at the Post 8 years. I freelanced and wrote the city politics column at New York Magazine for a few months when opportunity arose in a new quarter. The Times settled a class action sex discrimination lawsuit filed by the Women's Caucus at that newspaper. Timing again. The Times, had to hire some women fast, and covering New York was a fundamental priority of the Times in those days. I was qualified, so that might not have mattered pre-lawsuit. I was hired 1 year, almost to the day, after the lawsuit was settled. So you do the math. Once at the Times, I starting in late 1979, I covered Albany for a few months. I found the place dull and the culture sexist, and I could not wait to get out. Fortunately, my stint there was cut short by a transit strike in New York City. Fortunately for me, not New York City. The Metro desk called me back to cover Ed Koch, and I stayed in town and eventually became the City Hall bureau chief, the first Times woman to serve in that role. May I say that for me, what's notable about that first, as far as I'm concerned, is that it came so late in 1985, but it came. I have to digress and say that covering Koch was a kick, because as those of you who also covered him will well remember, he was great copy. He could not stop making news, front page bylines, news analyses, week in review pieces. They never stopped, because he never did. Some, if not most of his grandstanding would not get the attention today that it did then, but a lot of it was quite substantive. One story, I have to digress again because it's such a delicious anecdote. One story I will never forget never ever forget, was about the alleged poisoning of the city water supply. I don't know if any of you remember this, but it was a fantastic story. One afternoon, the mayoral wing of City Hall, which was always open to guests, commissioners, and reporters, was closed. The iron gates were locked, and an odd hush had settled over the building. So we knew something was going on, we meaning the reporters in room 9. I called mayoral confidant Dan Wolf. "What the heck is going on?" I asked Dan, a founding editor of Village Voice and a calm, often phlegmatic fellow. He said over the phone, and I'm on the corner there because I didn't want George Arts and other reporters to hear. I think you were still in room 9 then, George. Anyway, so I asked him, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, they found something in the water." "What, Dan? What did they find in the water?" "I forget," he told me. "But it's okay. I'll call you back." I begged him to make it fast. For some reason, he did. It's plutonium." "But it's okay." I'm sitting there wondering who's overhearing me, because those of you who've been in room 9 may know that it's, everybody's on top of a very small room. Anyway, he says, "It's okay." I almost shouted in a hushed voice, "Plutonium? The stuff in H-bombs, plutonium?" "Yeah, it's plutonium. But I told you, it's okay." I immediately called the Metro editor, John Vinegar at the time, to brief him. As we spoke, Abe Rosenthal, the fearsome executive editor of the Times in those days, was approaching the Metro desk. I heard John say, "Yes, Abe, I know. I have Joyce on the phone. She just told me." Koch had called each newspaper editor and TV station news director to advise calm. Now, those of you who were at the Times in those days will understand what a victory that was. I had scooped Abe. It seems silly now, but in those days it meant so. Anyway, it really was okay. There were high readings of plutonium in one test, but other tests were normal. The city did not panic. In fact, as I recall, New Yorkers reacted with a collective shrug. And I got plenty of points for my sourcing and quick thinking. Talk of timing. Timing was everything in yet another way. I found the love of my life at the Times. As most of you know, Max Frankel was a widower and the executive editor of the Times. I was the City Hall bureau chief when we began to see each other. I did not work directly for Max, but he was the top guy in the news department, and I was a member of the news staff. We knew our relationship was bound to be complicated, but we were willing to pursue it. Actually, nothing could have stopped us, except for one thing. Today, no way. In the post-Me Too era, we would never have risked seeing each other. To be clear, please, I am not being critical of the Me Too movement. No, the opposite. Although, don't get me started. No, this is not about the reporting. Don't get me started about the execution of Al Franken, but for another speech. I am just saying that if the Times had done its coverage of sexual abuse and harassment in my day, my life would have been quite different, and Max's too. The growth in investigative reporting, like the brilliant Me Too work at the Times, is a prime example of one of the positive changes in our business since my salad days. But as I said at the beginning of my remarks, a lot that's going on today is far from positive. You all know this, and I will not dwell on it, but I wouldn't feel right speaking to a room full of journalists without at least touching on the problems in our profession. I mourn the disappearance of local newspapers throughout the country and the cheapening and politicization of many of those that still exist. That is one of the most troubling changes. Coverage of the city is not what it used to be either, alas. I was so very lucky to come along during what I think of as the golden age, graced by New York Newsday, The Times' separate Metro section, the Daily News under Mike O'Neill, the Post before Murdoch. Online news and investigative websites do a great job, but I hope it is not old fogeyism to observe that it is not the same. At least it's not for me. We all know that newspapers have always been political, but as I see it, the divisions today, the peddling of distortions and outright lies, thank you, Rupert et al., are just plain ugly and destructive. So are the extremes of the woke culture that cancel and censor. I wonder if Mr. Dooley would see contemporary journalism as he once did today, as a means to afflict the comfort and comfort the afflicted. Okay, sorry to sound so negative. I know the profession still attracts promising young talent. I read and see and watch them and hear them every day. There are not enough of them in enough places, but I'm counting on them to turn things around someday. Happily, I lived through the golden age, as many of you did. I worked in it, and I found love in it. Max and I got married. I left the news department for 6 years on the editorial board, which is independent of the news department. I returned to the newsroom after Max retired to write, he didn't retire to write the Metro Matters column. After Max retired, I returned to the newsroom to write the Metro Matters column and then to be Metro editor. I made my share of mistakes, and I regret them, but what a ride. Timing is everything. I owe my career to it. I owe my marriage to it. I owe being a stepmother and a grandmother to it. I owe a lifetime of friends to it, many of whom are here or watching at home. I owe receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award to it. Let's see Jon Stewart top that. Happy to take questions.
You wrote a book about Mike Bloomberg. What's your assessment now? Is it time for a sequel?
I don't think so. No, I think Bloomberg's story is quite well known, and if he'd made any progress in his presidential campaign, maybe. But I can't see it now. So, and let me just add that Eleanor Randolph, a few years after I wrote a bio, she did a bio. Hi, Ralph. She did a bio as well that went a little further in time than mine. So I think he's been pretty well covered. So,
Joyce, dedicated, hardworking, words we use frequently and sometimes too casually. Joyce genuinely earned it. The summer of '77, covering the mayoral campaign, in the newsroom about midnight, we discovered a body. It was Joyce passed out in a darkened corner. Worked to exhaustion. We had to half carry her out to a car and deliver her back to Brooklyn Heights. Again, when you hear Joyce, people say dedicated and hardworking about Joyce, it's true.
I've fortunately forgotten that whole thing.
Joyce, you covered all these mayors. On a positive note, what are the characteristics of each mayor that you admire? Not their total performance, but one characteristic.
Ooh, great question. Well, I only covered Beam briefly, so I'd best not say anything about him because I can't think of any characteristic I admired anyway. Sorry, it's the truth. Koch is, his love of the city and his enthusiasm about being mayor was infectious, and it was very good for the city at the time as it was trying to come back from the fiscal crisis. I think it was his cheerleading quality, which I fear we overcovered a little bit, but I think it was wonderful for the spirit of the city. We did overcover it. I remember one reporter who was getting a little frustrated, not me, it was a reporter from New York Newsday, and he was getting a little frustrated with Koch telling us about everything he thought about everything. So this reporter asked facetiously, "What is your favorite color?" And Koch said, without missing a beat, without giving in to the sarcasm, because he knew what this reporter was doing, he said, "Blue, because I'm colorblind, but I can see certain tones, and blue is one tone that I can see." So headlines the next day, Ed Koch is colorblind. My point is, I don't know if it was headlines, but it was a story, and everybody, everything he said and did made news, and some of it was overdone, but it was good for the spirit of the city. So after, oh yeah, Dinkins. I think, no, I'm sorry. I think Dinkins believed that we had a marvelous mosaic. Whether everybody else does, I don't know, but I think he did, and I think that was good for the city. And I think he loved the city too. Bloomberg's, Giuliani. See, I didn't want to remember Giuliani. It's very hard to talk about Giuliani given what's happening today, or happened, now it has now probably disappeared, but he did do some good things. I mean, he got the X-rated shops away from Times Square. No, he did, I know, he did more than that. He did impose a certain discipline that the city needed, but mostly, in my view, he was very destructive and became even more so over the years. We really could have done without him. And then when he was trying to, he did well in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, he did. Some of you may not remember that he actually went out of his way to say that New Yorkers should not be punitive towards Muslims and should show any bias towards them, which of course I don't think the current day Rudy would ever do. But he did do that literally probably on 9/12, and that was pretty impressive. But then when he tried to stay around and extend his term, what can you say about that? Bloomberg, I could say a lot, I won't. Bloomberg, I think Bloomberg's ultimately turned out to be a very strong mayor, and I think his focus on management and on finances in the aftermath of 9/11, I think both were very, very important. He was serious, and for a guy who at the time owned 8 houses or something like that, and could jet wherever he wanted to go and did in his own plane. I think the fact that he wanted to be mayor and stayed around for 3 terms, a third term is, he engineered that in a way that really wasn't kosher as far as I'm concerned. But I think what I just said about the way he ran the city at a time when we needed him to do that, I think he was run it efficiently. I think it was very important, and he made quite a contribution. And that's where I stopped covering, really, right? Did I miss anything? Yeah, Matt?
So if you were a young reporter now,
The question was, if I were assigning a reporter, perhaps David Firestone, to write a story about the current city hall and the current mayor, what story would I assign? Did I get that right?
or what would you pursue as a reporter?
I don't want to give you a specific, but as a reader, I don't think I've read enough about Adams. I don't know why that is. I don't know why the coverage of him is kind of episodic, but I would like to learn. I think there's a lot more to know about him, and for some reason we don't know a lot. I mean, it used to be, I said this to friends, and maybe it's because I'm not reading as closely as I used to, but it used to be, as I said, we knew Ed Koch's favorite color was blue. But I think the pendulum has swung too far, and we don't know and maybe because we did overdo it for a while, but I don't think we know enough about Adams, about the way he lived his life, about what he believes in. The Times and other papers have shown the conflicts of interest quite well. But I'd like to know more about the man and his values and his history. I don't know if that's really a good answer, but that's how I feel. Barry?
We started together doing the TV listings.
There you go. Barry Adler and I started together, or at the Post, at the same time, and we were both in the features department. And he was saying that when he listed, it was radio, right, Barry? He had put the names of some friends in as guests on program. I didn't do that. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I had a friend who was in medical school. Wasn't clear he was going to become a doctor, but he was that night on Merv Griffin, heart surgeon. It was his parents loved it. Anyway, I was otherwise scrupulous. But what I want to ask you is that you were a guest at my wedding, and you were a very happy guest, as I recall. You danced with one of my cousins. I think it was very good. That didn't go further. But the question that Beverly and I both have is you got loopy that night. You drank a lot.
What? I didn't.
Loopy, that means you drink a lot.
Was I loopy at your wedding? Yes.
Yes. And you took the microphone.
I did.
And you sang.
I did.
What was that song?
What
was that song? And could we hear it again?
I have no. Barry, for those who could not hear, Barry said that I was at his wedding, which I was, and I was high on wine, which I... Loopy. I was, because I was hot. And I danced, which I still do and love to do, and that I also sang something. And he asked me what I sang. I have no idea. I can't remember. Maybe it was New York. I don't know.
No, I don't. We were entranced. I was loopy, so I don't know. But another time.
If there's something you'd like to sing, Joyce.
No. I'm not going to sing. No. Barry, I don't have my accompanist here.
What would you want Governor Hochul to know about New York now?
What would I want Hochul to know, Governor Hochul to know about the city?
Yeah, especially its politics now compared to what you were covering it.
What would I want Hochul to know about the city? Well, given what you just did about the air train, canceling the plans for the air train to LaGuardia, to and from LaGuardia, I wish he'd come down here and ride that. I think it's a Q70 bus. The alternative, it's not a minor issue, it's a big issue. She's saying that we just put more money into buses going back and forth from LaGuardia will solve the problem. So I think she ought to come back and take a few bus rides from LaGuardia to Manhattan to see how foolhardy that and completely limited in efficacy that approach would be. I don't think she could possibly understand the city if she could say that. So I'd like her to come here and spend a little time taking buses to and from LaGuardia and maybe a few subways. If I were writing Metro Matters today, that would be in the newspaper already, or online, or whatever you do these days. That really infuriated me. She just does not get it. Okay. Sorry, Ms. Hochul.
Joyce, where do you get local coverage if so much of it has disappeared, as you were talking about?
Where do I get my local coverage? Well, first and foremost, the Times. It doesn't have a separate section, and it's not doing as much as it did, but it does great work, and particularly on investigative stories about New York, terrific. So there's the Times, and then I look at multiple online publications that are sort of local, micro, but I can't say that. I can't say that I have NPR. I listen to NPR in the morning. That's about it. It's still more the Times than any place else.
Do you watch television news at all? Do you watch TV news?
I do watch TV news. I do watch local newscasts. I watch New York One, CNN, MSNBC. Apologies, I can't watch Fox. I just can't. I should, because it's educational. I'd learn, but I just can't. I have to say I don't watch local news as much as I used to. That's not a commentary on local news, it's a commentary on me, because I don't have to worry about finding a column subject, so, but I do watch it. And I don't ask me which one, because I watch several, I tune in and out, flit in and out. There's one more question.
One more question.
How would you cover the Republican Party today?
How would I cover the Republican Party in nationally? Well, I would cover it. It's not what you want, but I'll answer. I will cover Republicans honestly and diligently, and when they or Democrats or independents lie, I would use that word. They lied, or he lied, or she lied. I would be very clear-eyed about what I was hearing and seeing. That's not to say that it's not being done, but if you ask me what I would do, and that's what I would do.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
That was an education in journalism. Thank you. And it meant a lot to Joyce that all of you came.